All right, hey everybody. Day 2, we're just now starting the Crucible unit, and by now you should have watched the monsters on Maple Street, which we'll get to that in a second. You should have watched the video that just introduced you to mob mentality, herd mentality. What is it? It's basically an angry group of people who would do things that otherwise wouldn't maybe do. It doesn't always have to be an angry group. It has a negative connotation. When people get together and they do things, good. All of the stuff with the quarantine, COVID, everyone making a big deal over the healthcare workers. That's a form of mob mentality. In Minden, we have the St. Jude auction every year. That's a form of mob mentality. That's positive. But it's far more negative. There are more negative aspects of it. You saw that with the monsters on Maple Street. You also should have watched the video that talked about how easy it is to bully online, mob mentality online, through the anonymity of the internet. Very dangerous. A lot of pain and suffering and death caused by that. So basically just mob mentality, examples of it. The Holocaust, Adolf Hitler, World War II, Salem witch trials, lynchings, riots, many negative things where a single person wouldn't do something. But when people are afraid and when they see they have allies and other people feeling the same way, all it takes is one spark can start a blaze. And that's what happens with the Salem witch trials. And that's what happened with the monsters on Maple Street. So our video, basically, if you watched it, it was an episode of the Twilight Zone, and it was this community, this sort of middle upper class community, suburban. Everyone knows each other. People drive nice cars. They're probably the place where they don't lock their houses. Something happens, all the power goes out. They don't know what's going on. They can't talk to anybody. Cars don't work. Anything like that. Maybe it's the EMP, some kind of terrorist attack. There's a Middle Eastern family that lives on the street and they don't talk to anybody else. They don't communicate. And fear, paranoia, in just a few hours turns this quiet, nice neighborhood into a roaring mob. Yes, the acting was kind of cheesy, which I think makes it better because I love showing cheesy things in class. But it's a bigger picture, and I always show this video when we start mob mentality. And again, I do this unit more in depth with more hands-on, more visual aids, more things of that nature. We just can't do more discussion. We can't do discussion here in this venue. But I just want you to get the basics of it. And so you had a worksheet. So we're going to go over that worksheet for Monsters on Maple Street now. And basically I want to talk to you about bias, stereotype, and prejudice, because all three of these terms, these facts of life, are very prevalent in the Crucible we're going to read. So this bias here is an emotional reaction or opinion of a situation or a person based on personal experience or beliefs. It's one-sided. It's not objective. A bias may be positive or negative. A stereotype, an assumption that all members of a group will exhibit the same behaviors and characteristics as some members of the group. Example, all cheerleaders are snobby. Suspicion, the act of mistrusting something, especially something wrong without evidence or proof. Prejudice is a negative opinion of a person or situation formed before knowing the facts, based upon stereotypes and assumptions. So let's answer these 5 questions. What's the theme of the story? Well, basically, the theme of the story to me is it's a lesson in mob mentality. It's a lesson in how fear drives us. Fear is the most primal, basic emotion. Fear drives everything. According to Yoda in Star Wars, fear is the first thing. Fear leads to anger. Anger leads to hate. Hate leads to suffering. But everything is based upon fear. Wars, any kind of violent act, any kind of just even positive things is based upon fear, so we can keep moving forward. How does fear contribute to what happened on Maple Street? Well, the people were afraid of what was going on. They thought it might be a terrorist attack, and so they rallied together. And they didn't rally together positively to make a positive difference, to find out what was going on in a positive way. They reacted negatively. They lashed out at an imagined common enemy, somebody that they could put all their frustration on, as a mob. Number 3, what conflicts have you discovered in the story? Well, the main conflict is the protagonist, the hero of the story, the guy who was trying to calm everybody down. And I can't remember off the top of my head what his name was, but the fellow who was trying to calm everybody down, he was the boss, and he was trying to tell his wife, and his wife ended up turning on him, and he was the only one that had reason at the end. So there's this conflict of rationality and irrationality, fear triumphing over logic, emotion triumphing over reason, conflict. Number 4, what is mob mentality? What are the characters of this screenplay? Show development mob mentality. What caused this mob mentality? Basically, mob mentality, people getting together via peer pressure. People might join in on things even though they don't agree with it because they're afraid of being cast out. In this instance, though, it was just a common fear. You had the one guy leading everybody together, whipping everybody up into a fervor, and then they acted out. Fear caused it. The perceived terrorist attack caused it. And then the one family that was different and was of another nationality caused it. Number 5, give at least one example found in the story the following terms. Suspicion. It says right there, suspicion is the act of mistrusting something, especially something wrong, without evidence of proof. Everyone is suspicious of the family. Period. Suspicion. Even before this attack happened, don't you remember the guy, the leader of the rabble rouser, basically? He was saying that there's something weird about those people. This is before the everything went crazy. Number 5, bias. Well, a bias is an emotional reaction or opinion of a situation based on personal experience. Well, what about the woman? I mean, anybody on there, they all had bias. But what about the woman who saw everything through the lens of the Air Force base? On base, we did this, and so on, so on, so on, so. Prejudice, a negative opinion of a person's situation formed before knowing the facts. Again, the family, how they were treated. Prejudice. Stereotypes, an assumption that all members of a group will exhibit the same behavior. Well, this was a Middle Eastern family. This video was made, this episode of the show was made right after the terrorist attacks on 9/11, and everyone at the time had issues with Middle Easterners, quote unquote. Everyone's a terrorist. That's a stereotype. All right. Okay, now let's talk a little bit more in depth and then talk about tomorrow. Just a rundown, a brief introduction of what mob mentality was. We can get way more in depth to it. I have a lot more lessons. I have a lot more materials, but you just can't do it in this. Even if we had a Zoom type thing, a Google Classroom type thing, you still couldn't have the discussion that I'd like to face to face. But you have the idea, and you saw it, a modern representation of it through the Monsters on Maple Street. And you may be saying that there's no way that something like that could happen, but it can. It doesn't take a lot for society to fall apart, and fear is the driving factor in it all. Fear of not having enough, period. Okay, so what needs to be done is you need to watch the next video. This is just going to give you a few minutes of background of the Salem witch trials, and then you need to read the first common lit that I've posted, which is titled The Salem and Other Witch Hunts. All right? If you have a copy of the Crucible, you can start reading that as well. Read Act 1. It's a play, all right? Read Act 1, or if you can watch the movie, that's great. It's The Crucible from 1996, starring Daniel Day-Lewis. I will be showing clips of that as we progress through this unit. If you don't have a copy of the text, you can get a copy of the text online, free, or I'm also going to post audio recording of it like I always do. Make sure you watch the video, Salem Witch Trials, the one's posted in the portal, and read the common lit. Till I see you again, great day to be a warrior.